Hello everyone and welcome to the Rebrandly Link Up, the series where we bring you actionable online marketing insights from the experts. This week we're going to be talking to Sancar, the VP of Marketing from Typeform, about a topic that's pretty essential to any business, big or small, and that is brand building. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So, Sanchar, thanks a million for joining us today. Before we start, give us a little background info about yourself, Typeform, and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. I'm originally from the UK. I've been living in Barcelona for the last 10 years, more or less. My name sounds a little bit foreign because I'm half Turkish. My father is Turkish. But yeah, like I said, been living in Spain for 10 years, working for different early to mid-stage startups. So I've got about 9 years experience working in different startups. And I come from a creative background, fell into marketing almost by accident, and then it's really just kind of evolved from there. I'm now the VP of Marketing at Typeform, where I oversee brand and product marketing, performance marketing, lifecycle, all of the kind of traditional channels you would imagine. And yeah, just really kind of seen explosive growth from Typeform. So it's been a really interesting journey. And Typeform, what is Typeform? So Typeform is a tool for building next generation online forms. So if you're a small to medium business and you want to collect information or exchange information on the web with your employees, your audience, your customers, then you're probably doing it through some kind of online form. And what we think is the best way to do it is to make that online form a remarkable interaction. So we think forms should be remarkable experiences, and that's basically what we strive to do with our product.
So today we're focused on brand building. Sancho, you're heavily involved with this over at Typeform. Could you give us a brief overview of what brand building means to you, and maybe tell our viewers a little bit about your recent rebrand?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting topic. If you ask 5 different people what a brand is, what it means to build a brand, then you're probably going to get 5 different responses. I think it was Jeff Bezos from Amazon who said this, which is a really interesting way to put it. He said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And that really resonates with me. It's what that means is to build your brand, it's about looking after every single touch point you have with your market. And depending on the way that you care for or don't care for those touch points, and the way that you control those touch points in certain ways, will change the way that people talk about you when you're not in the room. So the brand is really that. It's a sum of all of your touch points with your audience, with your market. So yeah, like you mentioned, we went through a rebrand here at Typeform. When I started here 3.5 years ago, we were experiencing a lot of growth, almost exponential growth, from the fact that our product had virality built into it. So when somebody creates a Typeform, they share that Typeform with their audience, and a certain percentage of that audience sees the technology, enjoys the technology, and wants to go and create a Typeform themselves. So that's obviously a dream for any SaaS product to have that kind of virality. And I'm sure you guys experience a similar effect because you're exposing your product by actually getting people to use it. So it's a marketer's dream. But the downside of that was that the market positioned us, kind of did all of the positioning for us. So people would be talking about Typeform, but not necessarily in the way that we wanted them to talk about Typeform. So what we saw was that a lot of people were talking about us in the context of us being a survey tool. And that would be okay, except we know that when somebody comes to us just for a survey, they disappear pretty soon after because they only have that one use case, and maybe they only need another survey 3 to 6 months later or whatever it might be. Also, we know that we're much more versatile and there's much more you can do with Typeform. And there's much more you can do in general in the online form space. So we wanted to take control of the way that we were positioned in the market, to go beyond just being positioned as a survey tool into being positioned as a more horizontal tool for SMBs to use across their entire customer and employee lifecycle. So to do that, we really spent a lot of time trying to work out what our story was, who we really think we are, and then we thought about how we're going to tell that story. And that how was really the very last part. It's the bit that's visible to everybody on, the changes to the logo, the website, some of the wording, but it's really the last part of the process. But it was a very interesting and extensive process in many ways.
So, separate to what you guys have done in relation to rebranding, in terms of building a brand from the ground up, some might be inclined to think that branding simply refers to a catchy slogan, a nice logo, and, that's it. Now, is that true, or would that even be a good place to start?
Yeah, so no, I think is my answer, the short answer. So the way I would think about it is, how do you feel when you see a particular logo or slogan? And that response, how you feel when you see that, that's the brand. So I could create a logo now, and I could show you it, and you probably will have zero emotional attachment to it. You're not going to feel anything. You're not going to think expensive, cheap, luxury, accessible, cares for the earth, doesn't care for the earth. You're not going to think any of that, because I haven't built any brand around that logo yet, because it's brand new. So really, a logo is just a representation of a brand, but the brand itself is all of the feeling that's evoked from that logo, that slogan, or other parts of the brand. And one way to think about this is, think of some logos and slogans and think how you feel. When you see the Starbucks logo, do you feel relaxed? Do you feel stressed? I don't know. It depends on your experience with Starbucks. Do you kind of feel angry because they don't pay their taxes, allegedly? What do you feel? What are the touch points that they've created with you? Think of Make America Great Again, associated with the Trump Association. But let's imagine that the NPCA, the National Park Conservation Association, used that slogan instead. And when they used it in the context of making national parks in the US better and creating more natural space and all of this, then that slogan would have a very different meaning and would produce a very different feeling. So it's not the slogan itself that creates those feelings. It's just a representation for all of the touch points and feelings that a brand has created. And this goes beyond logos and slogans. It goes into sounds. So how do you feel when you hear we're talking on Skype now, and Skype has a very distinctive startup sound, exactly, and the ring sound. 20th Century Fox has a very distinctive sound. What do you feel when you hear that? Do you feel that kind of feeling of great? The next 2 hours of my life is just sitting and watching and enjoying a movie. So it goes beyond that, and it goes into smells. What do you think when you smell Johnson's baby talc, or what do you think when you smell Calvin Klein cologne, or whatever it might be? So it's not about the logo, it's not about the design, it's not about the words, the spell, the sound, or anything. It's about all of the emotion and the collection of feelings that you associate with that particular thing.
When it comes to brand development, you've said previously that something called narrative theory comes into play, broken into 5 stages from equilibrium to new equilibrium. Could you expand a little bit on that for our viewers, and on what these are and how they tie into telling a brand story?
Yes. So disclaimer: this is not my theory. This is it's not something I invented. So yeah, there was a guy called Todorov who was, he was a sociologist. He was actually many things. If you look at his LinkedIn profile, it's ridiculous. Like, he was everything under the sun: a sociologist, a historian, essayist. But he came up with something called narrative theory, which is he argued that any strong narrative could be categorized into these five stages. And as you mentioned, those stages were equilibrium, so the status quo, the disequilibrium, so a disruption to that status quo, acknowledgement, so somebody or a group of people acknowledge that there has been a disruption, and then an attempt, so somebody or a group of people try to restore the status quo, and then the new equilibrium, which is when after having gone through that whole experience, you have the new normal. So you have whatever the new normal is after going through that whole story. So I found this very interesting because, it's usually applied to narratives in terms of books and movies and things like this. But actually, when you start to look at some of the most successful brands in the world, I think they follow a very similar narrative structure. So I think this is really useful when looking at your own narrative story and trying to work out what is the change that you're trying to make in the world. So, I've definitely found this useful. It's, what is the status quo now? What is the change we want to see in the world? And what is our part in creating that change? And once you answer those questions, you basically have your own narrative story.
So when it comes to branding, ourselves here at Rebrandly, for instance, we believe that your brand should be at the center of everything you do. And that's why we empower people to put their brand name on every link that they share. So how valuable do you think the use of branded links is in terms of building a brand?
Yeah, I think it's great. So links are, I think there are still these, multiple kind of touch points and bits of real estate where we have the opportunity to say something about our brand or to remind people of our brand, but we often don't take advantage of that. I think links is one of those things. So we're constantly sharing links online, over social, over email, on our website, etc. And to not use that valuable piece of real estate to remind people of your brand is a waste. So I think links are a great touch point to remind people about your brand. So excuse me, I think it's great.
So over the past decade, countless businesses and companies have undergone a rebrand. Now, would there be any examples in particular that would stand out to you, maybe as a success or a failure, or any that surprised you in any way?
So one person's success is another person's failure and vice versa, right? And I think to be a strong brand, you have to fail in some people's eyes. You have to disappoint somebody. I think if you're pleasing everybody, then you're probably not a very strong brand. So I'm not sure about successes and failures, but there have been some interesting examples. Most of my examples, come from the digital tech space and more specifically SaaS, because that's the industry I'm in. Dropbox went through a rebrand not that long ago. They went very kind of arty, and that was quite interesting because there was this, not sure if you saw it, but there was this Twitter thread with reactions from people talking about the rebrand. And people got very critical, very passionate. Yeah, that's the diplomatic way to say it. Trolling, they were borderline trolling. And there were thousands and thousands of people commenting, and people felt so strongly about it. But actually, I think what we were witnessing was the alienation of a certain segment of their audience. But probably what we weren't seeing was the strengthening of another segment of their audience, which is probably the kind of more artistic audience. So I think that was an interesting case. I always use Squarespace as an example for a strong SaaS product. I think Squarespace just get this right time and time again. They have an extremely strong brand presence. They do amazing brand marketing, and they do it with a certain sense of confidence. They really seem to know who they are, and they really have strong brand marketing. So they've recently gone through a kind of not a complete rebrand, I would call it, because actually there's not that many differences, but they've recently modified updated their brand guidelines, and what they've really tried to do is put New York, where they're based, into the center of everything they do in terms of design. Airbnb was another interesting case. So, talking about the Dropbox Twitter thread, Airbnb was very interesting. There were so many memes made from the Airbnb new logo after they rebranded, basically making the logo into different forms of genitalia. And that kind of, just got a bit out of control, I would say. But that was really interesting. I think they came up with a really strong brand. But of course, some people, they like to kind of latch on to the things that they don't like so much. But I think that's as interesting as, the people saying what they do like. Because, like I say, I think a strong brand, it will always alienate a certain group of people.
Brilliant. So, Sancho, to finish up, if you could give viewers 3 actionable pieces of advice for discovering their brand identity, what would they be? Yeah,
so it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the previous questions. So, thinking of that narrative theory, I think one of the first things you can do to try and get to, to understand what your brand identity is to understand what your narrative is. So why do you exist? What is the change that you would like to see in the world? Why did your product even exist? Why did the founder even build this, founder or founders build this thing in the first place? What was the change they wanted to see? And when you know what change you want to see in the world, you can kind of turn that into a vision, into a company vision. And then you can think about what is your product adding to that vision. So I think a good company vision is never something that company alone can achieve entirely by themselves. It's more something they contribute to in a big way. So you need to think, what can your product do to achieve that particular vision? And the final thing I would say is, and we did this, and it was really where any of the success that we have achieved through that came from. And that's really just talk to employees, talk to customers, talk to people who aren't customers, talk to people who were customers but aren't customers anymore, talk to the founders, talk to all the people around you, because 9 times out of 10, that brand story, that strong brand story is already there. It's just about extracting it from people and, trying to understand what already exists around you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks a million for joining us today, Sanchar. Any closing thoughts for our audience, and where can people find you online if they want to chat or find out more?
Yes, so if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm on Twitter. I am Sanchar, so I am SANCAR. And then I'm on LinkedIn. You can search for my name. Happy to kind of connect with people interested in this topic. In terms of closing thoughts, whenever I'm talking about brand building and all of that, I always try and finish it with the same thing, because it's something I truly believe in, which is, anyone can copy your product, but not anybody can copy your brand. In fact, nobody can copy your brand. So I always like to think about this, when building your product, don't treat brand as this kind of separate add-on, this nice to have. It's actually your defensibility. It's your future. Anybody with enough money, enough resource or whatever can copy your product, but nobody can copy your brand. So that, I guess, would be my closing thoughts.
Brilliant. Right, well, Sanchar, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and take care.
All right. Thanks, Sean.
So that was Sanchar Sahin of Typeform, and thanks a million again to him for joining us. If you enjoyed this link up, please do be sure to like, share and subscribe. You can comment below if you want to continue the discussion further. You can catch us on our social channels or follow the branded link on screen. And until next time, take care.